welcome everyone to our presentation, What SLPs Should Know About Autism, A Parent's Perspective. The next slide, we're going to show you some disclosures so you can take a look at.
Okay, so now I'm going to get into some introductions. Hi, everybody. My name is Pana Poto. I'm a manager of parent and family engagement, early childhood at a disability nonprofit here in New York City. Part of my role is to provide technical assistance for parents and caregivers of children with disabilities and connect them to supports and services, including speech therapy. I am also the co-founder of the Bronx Parents Autism Support Circle. It's a growing parent group for parents of children with autism in the Bronx. Last but definitely not least, I am the mom of 2 children, ages 4 and 13, and we have a picture of them here. We are taking them to the Bronx Zoo a couple of weeks ago. Our daughter received speech therapy and she has made significant progress, so much so that now she tells us that we're grounded and a whole lot more. However, it is our older son's story that brought my husband Chad and I on this path to be able to speak before you today. In 2009, I was sitting with our 2-year-old son in his pediatrician's East Village office as she asked me milestone questions to check his development. One of those questions was, how many words does he have? She asked. He babbled. He babbles, I replied. Is he following directions? I replied, no. I saw her take notes with a concerned look on her face. And as we were leaving, she asked me to call 311 to refer him to early intervention. My son started receiving services shortly after he was evaluated. Once he aged out of early intervention, he moved on to a full-time preschool special education program. I recall reading one of his preschool quarterly reports and noticing that his progress was stagnant. He was transitioning to kindergarten the following year, so I decided to have him reevaluated. And that is when he was diagnosed with autism that fall. And that is where my journey to become his advocate and to amplify his voice began. So if you notice, I said amplify his voice, not speak for him. Speech was one of the first services that he received because honestly, it was one of the first things that we noticed as parents. Back then, I didn't know about occupational therapy, I didn't know about physical therapy, and I didn't know about autism. But I did know that my 2-year-old should be saying a lot more than babbling. No one mentioned the word autism to us all through early intervention and most of his time in preschool. It was us taking the initiative to find out that what was going on with our son that led to him being evaluated and diagnosed with autism. And now I'll pass it on to Chad so he can tell you a little bit about his journey to this space as a dad.
So good morning again, everyone. My name is Chad Royer. I am one of the founding members of Bronx Parent Autism Support Circle since July of 2013. I'm also a current board member of Bronx Community Board 7, where I formerly held the title of the chairperson of the Health Committee. I wear many other hats as an activist in my local community of University Heights, but some of my distinctions are simply autism dad and a proud advocate for disabilities rights and the autism community. Some of my past work has included petitioning for the MTA to include an elevator for the Marshall Loop Parkway train station on the 4 line and hosting 2 disabilities awareness forums at Lehman College with fellow ambassadors Leslie Grubler and other members of NYSSLHA. So I share with you that as an adult, I personally did not start speaking until I was 4 years old. And now I can't keep quiet. So my parents sought the advice from the Kennedy Center at the time, the Kennedy Center in the Bronx. So when our son was born, I became a father and my father became a grandfather. So when we received the diagnosis of autism, everything changed. I started to realize fast that as I was learning more about raising my son, my father didn't know much about autism either, and I had to help him understand the process of what we have to go forth to raise our child and his grandchild. So to this day, I thank my late father for being an active participant in my son's life. It really made a difference. Now, why are we here? We want to give you our parent perspective on what speech and language pathologists like yourself should know about autism and how it can impact our children. So I just want to briefly go over the agenda. So we have the attendee poll, review learning objectives, speech development and autism, collaborating to develop speech goals, building relationships with parents, and the last part is the discussion. So for everyone who's looking at the screen, we have a poll here. I'm wondering if each of you can kindly answer the questions and put it in the chat. Are you a student, professional, or caregiver is the first question. The second question is, what age range of young people do you provide speech therapy services to? So if you can kindly, okay, so we have a few.
Okay. So we have a lot of professionals.
3 to 5 is prominent.
Yeah. Okay. All ages, grad students, 0 to 3, 3 to 5, all ages.
3
Okay.
to 4.
Okay.
Professional and caregiver.
Okay. So we have a wide range of ages that you guys serve. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have some students, some professionals, pretty much all the demographic you serve, it pretty much spans the lifespan, pretty much from 0 and up. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you.
So now I'm going to go over our learning objectives for today. We want you to be able to explore the meaning of autism and how it can impact speech development. We're also going to talk about 3 ways that you can work with parents and caregivers to develop meaningful speech goals for their children, and then some strategies you can use to build a collaborative relationship with parents and children on the autism spectrum. So let's get into speech development and autism. If you guys can share in the chat, what do you know about autism? I know April is Autism Awareness Month. I know some of you may have seen the Autism Speaks commercials on TV. You may have, heard about autism in the news. I know a lot of times autism is always in the news in April, but as us families who have loved ones on the autism spectrum, we live autism 365 days of the year. So we're aware of autism every month, not just April. So if you guys can just share in the chat what you know about autism, that would be really great. Let's see what somebody can share. Okay, so we have some people who teach, someone said, Sandra said she teaches a course on autism.
Social
and
sciences.
She treats people on the spectrum. And then we have Linda who mentioned speech and language delays, social challenges. There's some differences in social communication, as someone else said. So thank you so much, guys, for sharing. So when we say spectrum, we mean that there are other disorders, including autism, that's grouped under autism spectrum disorder. So as you know, there are no physical characteristics of autism. So you can't look at someone and know if they're on the spectrum or not. So I remember telling someone that my child was on the autism spectrum, and she said, "Oh, but he looks so normal." I mean, I didn't even know how to process that or what that was supposed to mean. But, that kind of reinforces my point that you can't look at somebody and tell that they're on the autism spectrum. There are no physical characteristics of autism. How many of you have seen the movie Rain Man? So I'm sure you may remember the character that Dustin Hoffman played, right? However, every person with autism does not display the same characteristics that he did in that movie. And this reminds me of a saying in the autism community that if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. So some children on the autism spectrum may need more support than others. Their development can vary from person to person, and this is the same for speech development. So our son has been receiving speech therapy since he was 2, and now he's 13. And he still struggles in some of his areas of communication with others. So our brains interpret or understands the things that we see, smell, hear, taste, and touch, and experience but someone on the autism spectrum may have a hard time interpreting these things. It can make it difficult for them to talk, to listen, to understand, to play, and to learn. They may also have trouble learning the meaning of words and having conversations with someone else. And if you notice, I'm using the word may, right? Because not everyone there are some children on the autism spectrum, some individuals that can have a full-on conversation with you. And then there are some that have no expressive language at all. They may have to use a device or other ways to be able to communicate. So I'll give you an example of our son. He has limited communication. So when we ask him, how was school today? He repeats, school today. He has a hard time having conversations with other people. And a lot of his communication is needs-based. So he might say, juice, please, or I want juice, please. And it can be difficult for him to pick up on social cues, which can make communication tough when he's in a social environment. However, we're also connected to an entire village of parents of children on the autism spectrum. So we know there are some children who are able to have, like I said, have a full conversation, and then some don't speak at all. So others may use a communication device, and others may have limited communication skills. So the impact on speech development, as I mentioned, speech development in individuals with autism, it can fall on a spectrum. So their expressive language can range from none to limited to having the full ability to be able to express themselves. And autism can also impact their receptive language and how they're able to understand. And so the range of comprehension for someone with autism can vary. So does any of this resonate with any of the young people that you work with? Please feel free to share in the chat if any of this reminds you of anybody that you've worked with, because I know a lot of you work with individuals directly.
Quite a few. Yes.
Thank you. So yes, we have a lot of absolutelys and yeses. So thank you so much for sharing that. So now we're going to go on to how you can collaborate with families to be able to develop speech goals, right? And we have 4 ways that we highlighted here on the screen. So the first is, you want to have a discussion with the parent, right? You want to help the parent understand what progress looks like. You want to welcome input from the parent. And meeting with the parent before meetings like the IFSP meeting or the IEP meeting, that can really help. So the goal of every parent, at least most of the parents I know, including us, is for our children to be able to communicate with us. And how that communication happens can vary based on how the child's diagnosis impacts their speech development. So if found eligible, children with autism can get speech as early as in early intervention, which will be outlined on their individualized family service plan. And I know when we did the poll in the beginning, some of you said that you work with children receiving early intervention, so you already know about this. If the child is 3 years or older, they can be found eligible to receive services through an individualized education program known as the IEP. So to be found eligible, they'll have to have a 33% delay in one area or 25% delay in 2 or more functional areas of development, which includes communication. So I also know there are some individuals who may be receiving services like speech through an Article 16 clinic. So an example of that for those of you in New York City, YI is an example of an Article 16 clinic where someone can get speech therapy services and it can work with a clinician on their speech goals. I'm sure some of you work with children in early intervention or in the school system or in an early childhood program. So you have experience with writing speech goals for an IFSP or IEP. So I would be preaching to the choir if I tried to tell you how to write a smart speech IEP goal for children like my son or even for my daughter. But today I want to put the focus more on how you as therapists can collaborate with parents and caregivers to create these goals. So like I said, you want to have a discussion with the parent regarding their concerns about their child's speech development. So this is a good opportunity to really get some insight into the child that you're working with. So remember, you may only see that child for 30 minutes twice a week. It will be a 1 time 30 mandate or 2 times 30 or 3 times 30. But the parent or caregiver is spending a lot more time with their child. So their insight is very valid, so is yours. So this is a good time to get some collaboration going. You want to ask open-ended questions and listen. Some parents may know that their child is not developing on target, And then some of them may be in denial, right? So there could also be some cultural issues at play. So applying cultural competency to how you communicate with parents can go a long way to get them to open up to you, right? We all want our children to develop and make progress. And the fact that you are in this line of work tells me that you do also. So, they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. When what one person sees can be different from what someone else sees. And the same can apply here. So I can observe one thing, my husband can observe something else, a professional can observe something else. And so it's good when all of us can come to the table and be able to talk and collaborate and share our concerns, right? So ways we do this, we send emails, we have a communication notebook. Sometimes we may even take videos to be able to show to the therapist so they can actually see what's happening when they're now working with the child in a session. Number 2, we have help the parent understand what progress really looks like in speech development. So how are you monitoring the child's progress, right? Share this with the parent. Some parents will say, my child's been in speech for a year and he's still not talking, right? I know I get that a lot at work. So helping parents understand that not all communication is verbal can go a long way. Some children may develop by leaps and bounds and others may take baby steps. Others may honestly not be making progress. And this is when the team has to come together to assess and see what changes can be made in the approach and the goals. Parents and therapists alike need to understand that speech is a form of communication, and learning speech does not always equate to successful communication. So you can teach a child how to say a sentence, but if the child doesn't know how and when to use that sentence, that's something that you really want to think about, right? Even up to now, trying to teach our child first and last, like what comes first, what comes last, remains a challenge. And even after working with him to learn the process of speaking the words and making the sounds, that's something that he can struggle with as well. But we try our best to be able to work with him and to work in collaboration with the therapists that support him. Right? So what does progress look like in speech development? So remember I said there are some parents that may be concerned that their child is in speech therapy for months or even a year and not making any progress. So if you guys can please share in the chat, what does progress look like in speech development from your perspective as a clinician? That would be really helpful. So third on here, we have, you want to welcome input from the parents on what they would like their child to work on in speech therapy. So parental input is crucial to developing meaningful speech goals. Yes, you are the expert with years of academic and clinical training and expertise. However, the parent is also an expert on their child. This is why collaboration is so important, because you and the parent are truly a team. Be open and listen. If you disagree with a parent, explain why and find middle ground. Of course, the child's best interest and what is appropriate for the child should always be at the center of all discussions. And I admit that some of us parents can get caught up in what we want, but it is truly about what is appropriate for the child. What does the child need? We sometimes sit in on some of our kids' sessions and listen and observe our child during these sessions. And it gives us an opportunity to really see what's going on. And I know during the pandemic, our kids have been home. They've been 100% remote. And so this has really given us a chance to be able to see what their speech therapy sessions are like and how they're interacting with the therapist, what the therapists are working on, and seeing how we can even utilize some of those strategies outside of the sessions, right? It gives us time to be able to share our insight, ask questions. And then, it's important for therapists to be able to build trust with the parents and the child so that the information the therapist is sharing is welcomed. And then ultimately, the thoughts and opinions and observations of the parents are also very vital to this process. And so I see a couple of you have left some stuff in the chat. Yes, parent involvement is essential, yes. So I had asked earlier about progress, and Francesca said, depends on the individual child, perhaps expanding utterances can be a milestone for expressive language. right? So yeah, so those are some ways that you can look to see, because maybe before that child wasn't saying anything, right? And now the child is able to express themselves. So that can be seen as some progress. And then last but not least on this slide, we have meet with the parent before the IFSP and IEP meetings, right? To review their possible goals. And the same can be if you're seeing a child in a clinic, right? So the child in a clinic may not necessarily have an IFSP or an IEP, but they still have a plan, right? You're still going off of some plan. You're still working off of goals. So working with the parent to be able to develop those goals can go a long way. So I started doing this when our son was in kindergarten. So as soon as I knew he had an IEP meeting coming up, I would email his therapist to discuss what they have in mind for him in regards to his annual goals. They will also ask me what my concerns are and what I would like for him to be able to work on for that school year. And we're doing the same thing for our daughter. So remember in the beginning, I said we have a 4-year-old. She also gets speech therapy. And she's in a preschool special education program. And one advantage to doing this, in addition to being able to collaborate, is by the time you get to the meeting, there are no surprises because everyone's on the same page. If there were any issues or concerns, I'm able to talk to the therapist about that before we get to the IEP meeting, right? You don't want to leave any stones unturned, any T's uncrossed, and any I's undotted. So this is an opportunity for you to go over any goals that you're going to be developing, so there's no errors, and you and the parent are on the same page, right? And another reason why this is important is if there's any conversation about changing the mandate, like maybe you feel that it will be more appropriate for the child to be seen more often or less often, that can be discussed ahead of time so the parent isn't blindsided at the meeting, right? So do you as a therapist or do you practice any of the strategies that we went over? Is there anything that you would like to add to our list? Please feel free to add that in the chat. How do you collaborate with families to develop speech goals? And I just wanted to say that we're going to leave some time at the end for, a discussion and any kind of Q&A, but, feel free to drop in the chat if you use any of the strategies that we shared here, and if there's anything that you would like to add to our list. Okay, so some people use phone, they use email, and someone also shared something that was really having ongoing conversations, sending surveys. Oh. Yeah, and someone, yes, okay, they use an app called Parent Square. Someone also said that a child may not make progress for months or years, right? So setting those realistic expectations is very important, I believe. Thank you so much, guys, for sharing. Okay, so Denise is saying it's so important for speech therapists to speak to parents before the meeting. Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Okay. Thank you so much, guys, for sharing. So now I'm going to pass it on to Chad, and he's going to talk about how you can build relationships with parents.
Okay, so building relationships with parents. This is really a continuation of what we went over when we discussed collaborating to develop speech goals. However, your relationship with parents and caregivers, it goes beyond goal development. So let's look at engage in ongoing communication via the parent's preferred mode of contact as an email, phone communication, notebook, etc. So we understand that some programs may have their own standard way of establishing communication with parents. However, we have to keep in mind that parents come to this with varying levels of access and literacy levels. So language access is another big piece. Let's say, for example, if a parent indicates that in their primary language, let's say Spanish, for example, then the communication should be coming to them translated in order to foster a collaboration and relationship building. Now, I want to sidestep with a memory of a former provider who told us that she doesn't do notebooks, and if you want to get any kind of detail, please give me a call. Now, just so you know, we've asked the provider, this specific provider, because our son was not able to speak to us and tell us how his day was going. So what ended up happening, that notebook went to school, came back, it was always empty when it came home. So even in the presence of a phone call or a PTA meeting, a simple notebook with notes from a provider can be very vital. It provides a timeline of events and it helps to jog the memory. For the one teacher who decided that it was not a priority to leave notes in a notebook for a parent who is actively involved, I just want to say, please understand that everyone at the table is working for the child. Everyone is working for the child. To the eyes of the parent, communication builds trust. Now, I wanted to ask everyone, how do you communicate with parents and caregivers of the children you work with? How has this changed during the pandemic? I'm pretty aware that some of you may be providing therapy in person while others are doing teletherapy. So if you could kindly leave your comments in the chat. No, okay, the more caregiver involvements, the better the outcome. Okay, I agree with that one.
Yeah, someone said they meet by Zoom, teleconference, phone, okay, in person, okay.
The teleconference, that's interesting because, you know, there's many times you can get multiple people on a call. And at that time, sometimes the questions that you don't ask end up getting answered.
Right. So someone says during the pandemic, all of my colleagues have noticed that we are now in contact more with parents than ever before. And we have all seen much higher outcomes for communication. They use parent square videos and emails.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pandemic has really increased the level of involvement because parents are right there, right next to the children for those sessions, especially for the kids who are remote. And of course, yes, so Linda makes a good point to be mindful of what is shared electronically due to privacy concerns, sure. And progress has improved with parent involvement in telehealth, as Marianne is saying, definitely, definitely. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so number 2, we have be open and transparent while presuming competence. This piece is so important. Parents like us, we want to know how our child is really doing in speech therapy. So be open, be upfront, and just let them know. Is their child on track to meet certain speech goals? Does there need to be a reset, or do the goals need to be changed or modified? While these may come into play at the same time, presuming competence is very key. As parents, we want you to be realistic, but also to believe that with the right support, our children can make progress. Sometimes expectations will need to be revisited, but saying that a child will never do something, I mean, none of us really know for sure, and we shouldn't make that prediction that could in turn stunt a child's progress. I can speak on personal experience. There are certain things that I felt at a young age that my child would never do, but he's doing them now, and I'm actually proud of him for that. So let's go to number 3. Share strategies that you are working on in speech therapy and give parents some ideas on how they can implement them at home. So this is where fostering that home-school connection comes into play. So our kids, we've had speech therapists who would give us ideas on how we can encourage language development at home. They would share book references, books we can read, techniques that we could use throughout our daily lives, and then we will share how it's been working, and they would give their feedback. It's an ongoing back and forth that works in the best interest of the child. And one of our son's therapists, she's been around 5-6 years? Yeah. One takeaway that I can say is toward the end of the session, she's always given suggestions on what things to work on at home, as if it was part of the session. So in other words, she would give us some homework. So those things add value to the session. the confidence of the parent-therapist relationship, and also the development of the child. Now,
And I just want to jump in to say real quick, the reason why he's been seeing her for so long, he sees her outside of school. So he sees her at a clinic, so he's been really been able to build that relationship with her outside over the years.
right. So we have another question for you guys to answer. What is one helpful strategy that you have shared with a parent that really made a difference in the child's speech development? One or two, if you're able to come up with.
Okay, so we have Lisa who said that having parent involvement during virtual has been amazing. Just being able to stop and explain why I'm doing what I'm doing and how they can follow through at home. So that has also helped. Just washing hands during lockdown, attaching language to routines. Okay.
That sounds simple, but it's very, very powerful.
Turn taking, blowing bubbles. So those are some of the strategies. Limit light and sound distractions when they need to learn or an important concept. Maintaining a schedule. Not being hard on themselves to reduce frustration. Right, it's a routine that happens multiple times a day. I think the schedule is so important. Like we have a dry erase board that we write the kids' schedule out for the day, especially since they're remote, because when they were in school, you know, they go to school and they have their schedule and they know there's a lot of structure. So we had to try to mimic that at home. So we write out their schedule so they know when they're having their sessions, their class sessions, they know when they're having their therapy sessions. Follow the child's interests, use them to guide learning opportunities, encourage child to make a request rather than meeting all their needs automatically. That is so important, that one. Because when our son was little, sometimes he just had to like gesture and I'm ready to run and bring him the juice without him giving him a chance to ask. So that's really, really, yeah.
I want to get back on the previous one, not being hard on
Ourselves.
on themselves.
On us, like parents. Don't be
Okay, yeah. And anytime, for whatever reason, without reason that we can explain, a child can have a bad day. There are days where he or she may not want to do it. They're just tired, they're sitting there. And it's helpful when you as a therapist can recognize that maybe the child is not having a good day, and you know, those things will happen. But as long as you thank them for trying, you tell them you did good, we're gonna do a better job next time, you know, it's all right, you've gone so far, I'm glad, and give them a hand clap, a high five, a thumbs up. You know, those things are encouraging because the children remember that. They remember that.
Yeah, so something someone said about how we should model language, and that's so important. I remember when my son was a baby, my mom used to say, talk to him. And it was a foreign concept to me. Like, I'm talking to him, but he's not talking back or he's not communicating back. So it was really hard for me to do that. But she kept reminding me that's how he's going to learn language, by hearing it. So she used to tell me to speak to him. Even if he's not speaking back or he's not really, he's not responding, I should still say something to him. So that was something that in terms of modeling language, and that's why, you know, I've heard people say, don't use baby talk with babies, like talk to them as if they're little people, like I guess I can say, right? Kindness and understanding is key, definitely.
Yes.
Definitely. So now this kind of brings us into, oh, sorry.
Yeah, it brings us to our last section, the discussion. We've titled it, Let's Talk About It. So as speech therapists, what would you want parents to know? What can parents do to foster more collaboration and relationship building? We would like if you're able to provide some feedback on that.
Yeah, because we've gone over a couple things today and we're, you know, very open to learning from you. So if there's anything that you would like parents to know, please feel free to share that in the chat. And what can parents do to foster more relationship building with you as speech therapists and as clinicians?
Okay, we have 3 people with their hand raised.
Okay, so ask questions and provide feedback when they're not comfortable. Let us know when there are changes at home. Okay, some parents need explicit permission to give suggestions or input. Yeah, and that's where I think, you know, I'm not, I don't know if you meant it in this way, but I know there are some cultures where an individual will defer to the teacher or to the therapist. So they may not know that it's okay for them to give their input or for them to speak up. So definitely being open and letting them know that it's okay can go a long way. Okay, so Kathy said that is what she intended. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, be honest when things are not working based on the SLP suggestions. Okay.
Right.
So just having that open relationship going both ways can go a long way.
I see we have a hand raised.
Yeah, so we're gonna have, so what we'd like you guys to do, you know, as you share your suggestions, if you could share one thing that you heard today that you can implement with your interactions with families, or even if you're already doing it, if you could just share one thing that we mentioned today that you will start doing or continue doing. Okay. Okay, someone's talking about specific cultural variations and belief systems. We need to know as therapists what is important in your life.
To give more homework for parents.
Yes, try to communicate with the family as to what they are most comfortable with. Yes, we all need a reminder, that's true, that communication builds trust and is very powerful.
So maybe we should ask them to give us some homework.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, include parents in goal development, yes, yeah. That's definitely. So now we're gonna kind of open it up for questions. Make sure the therapist and the parents are on the same page before the IEP meeting. So that's the one thing. And that definitely goes a long way. I've been blindsided at the IEP meeting. So that's where I got that from. Because I got to the meeting and I found out that they were reducing my son's speech mandate from 3 times 30 to 2 times 30. And we had no idea that was happening. And the reason the school was doing that is because they were moving toward having one of the sessions be a collaborative session where the speech therapist would push into the classroom and work with all the kids at the same time. And so our son's IEP would say twice a week, he would get an individual, but then he was getting that collaborative session with the class. But nobody explained any of that to us until we got to the meeting. And so, of course, we pushed back because I didn't even know what they were talking about. Like, what? This therapist works with all the kids at the same time? I mean, I know some schools do follow that model, but the whole thing caught me off guard. Okay, so someone mentioned who are all the other caregivers that work with the child? Yeah, because families, I mean, you may have grandma that's working with the child, grandpa, cousin, brother. Be on the same page of the preferred mode of communication between the parents and the SLPs. Carryover of techniques at home is important. Support parents. Yes, it may be challenging, right? So you can give techniques and, you know, it's good to meet the parent where they are and realize that we are doing our best. But sharing those techniques can definitely help. So now we're gonna open it up. If anyone has any questions that they wanted to ask, or feel free to unmute.
Okay, so we have iPad
Okay.
W22.
Hi, can you see me?
Hi, good morning. Yes, we can see you. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you very much for giving us the parents' perspective. I work at a school called HASC. My name is Debbie Grorick, but I'm practicing with autistic kids for over 30 years, mostly in early intervention before the last 15 years at school. I wish all parents would be half as involved as you are, and it sounds like you're doing a wonderful job. I find my own challenges when parents do not respond. And I'm wondering if you have any expertise, like speaking to other parents. And I've tried multiple, methods. We are not allowed to use the communication notebook this year, which I loved for many reasons. But I do use email. I do use the phone. I do use daily notes, which are allowed. And I'm just wondering if you know other parents, who are just, they almost have like a wall between school and home. and they expect the teachers and therapists to fix the kids and, kind of like a magic. And I get minimal response from some families. So I'm concerned about, of course, the home life, because even during teletherapy, these are the parents that do not even sign on. They don't even, they just say, okay, so we're quarantined for a week. It's a week off,
Right.
Do you have any opinion about that or advice from other parents and
Yeah, so
frustration? I'm sure you felt frustration over the years.
Yeah, I'm actually familiar with PASS. I've done transition to kindergarten workshops at your site in Brooklyn, the one on Remsen Avenue. Yes, I'm familiar with your school.
Actually, the Brooklyn site is closing. I heard
Yeah. Yesterday. Yeah,
I'm in Woodmere. Yeah, very sad.
Very, very sad. I heard about that yesterday. Yeah, to answer your question, there could be a lot of reasons, especially now during the pandemic, why families are not engaging. The past year has been rough. You know what I mean? You have families who they may have lost a loved one. They're trying to balance working from home while doing remote learning with their child. And I think parents just need, it'd be helpful if we came up with a system to kind of stay on track. I know some parents who they've had their kids remote and they had to end up sending the kids back in person, even if it was hybrid, because it was becoming very difficult for them to be able to manage the sessions. And then a thing I think about too is how is the school building family engagement with the families, just in general? What's the relationship like between the school and the families to kind of foster that relationship? Because I know there's some schools where if they're not hearing from the parent or the child's not logging on, they will call to find out what's happening, what's going on. It could be that there's no, there is an adult in the home and that adult had to go to work. And there are some kids, I'm not talking about young kids, but there are some kids who may be home alone and they may decide, I just want to sleep. I don't want to log in on the computer. So these are really.
Or they don't have a computer.
Well, that's
right? Or they don't know how to use a computer.
That's a big one, actually.
Well, that's another thing, right? So this pandemic has really exposed a lot of cracks in the system that existed before we even knew what COVID was. Because like even getting devices, right? I know here in the city, the Department of Education they had this thing to give each child devices, but there are still some children who don't have devices, or the parent doesn't know how to use the device. Like what's Zoom? What's Google Classroom? So not taking for granted that just because you give somebody a device, they will even know how to turn it on. You may I know at my job, I have a team member who has actually done some work with families on how to use Zoom. So before I even invite you to a training, a training about a topic like IEPs or whatever, I want to show you how to use Zoom. And then a lot of parents are accessing technology on their phones. So we take a lot of things for granted. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it comes back to that relationship building and just understanding that families are under a lot of pressure right now. And I'm just hoping that at some point we'll all be able to bounce back from this.
Again, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Welcome.
I see that Denise has her hand up.
Hi, yes, I actually want to chime in on that last comment. I think that we also have to recognize that there is also the question of privilege. I see this a lot. I live in a very affluent neighborhood and I'm very involved in the PTA, but I acknowledge my privilege that I am a parent that has a flexible job, that I am not an essential worker. And very often it comes up even in PTA meetings where they'll say, oh, this is, a testament of how dedicated you are to your child's education. But people sometimes don't realize that these essential workers, it's not that they don't care, it's that their way of caring is they have to go out, they have to keep a roof over their head and food on the table. And they may live in a neighborhood that doesn't have adequate internet connectivity. They may have limited tech literacy, as you said, overall literacy. So I think this is a multifaceted issue, and we have to be very sensitive when we rush to question why a parent or a caregiver is not involved, because there are so many levels to this issue. And sometimes even asking a caregiver, how can I facilitate communication? What would make it easier? I know you work nights. Is there maybe a time during the day that I can connect with you, or vice versa? I mean, I know that there's also the question of we don't work around the clock, but sometimes if you do want to see progress in your client and it means that I have to call a patient after work hours, and that's what I need to do to see the progress in my client. So I think we sort of have to take a step back, have empathy. This global pandemic has unearthed so many issues, like you said, that were pre-existing. It's like someone pulled the Band-Aid. And so we have to figure out how to triage the situation and really remediate so that everybody's on the same page and we see the outcomes that we want to achieve.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Denise. I mean, I think you pretty much hit, as the saying goes, you hit the nail on the head with that. There's a lot going on. I'm sure you guys have seen that image of the iceberg. I've seen that a lot of presentations. There's a lot going on below the surface with families. And I think that family engagement piece, I mean, I've spoken with school administrators who, you know, they like, I know a school principal who said she had like a dedicated phone line for families, like they could reach her by phone, you know, so it could be 7 o'clock at night. I'm not saying everybody has to do this, but these are not normal times. And so there could be a lot going on beneath the surface as to why a family isn't engaged. And I think schools and programs that already had a solid family engagement piece in place, they may see better results now because they already have a connection with those families, even though the families may be going through a tough time. So, go ahead.
And I also want to add also, one of the biggest concerns that I've noticed from regular citizen and someone who's active in my community is the language barrier.
Mm-hmm.
So you have individuals who speak English as a second language, or you have English who predominantly speak whatever their language is and nothing else. Like for like in our neighborhood, it's English, Spanish, Bengali if you go up a little up north, and a little bit of French and Albanian, depending on what side of the town that you're in. And what I've heard from teachers, staffs, people across the board is that when they're not able to reach someone, a lot of times it's the language barrier, and we can't ask the question as, who are your emergency contacts? Is this your right number? Do you have an email? Do you have internet connectivity? Or is this your right address? And if so, if not, let's get your right address so that we can mail something where you can actually receive something.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know,
Yeah.
all that ties in.
Yeah, I see that. Alan has his hand up.
Yes, I have 50 years experience with children and adults on the spectrum, and I am the one who does not use a communication notebook because if my mandate is twice a week and I see somebody Monday and Friday, I do not want to wait those days to answer a question and then have a back and forth give and take. I usually call a family, especially working families, immediately following a session, and I schedule my clients that way. There are some employers, when told about that, they will be more than happy to cooperate with the family. Also, I've been using Google Translate. I've been serving Elmhurst, Queens for many years, where they have more languages and dialects than any other city village in the country. And there are many mechanisms and apps now to do the translation. I just want to respond to something about carryover, collaborative agreement, and all that. In the early intervention program, both on the quarterly reports and your daily session note, there are to be statements about what is to be done at home to support between visits and what a collaborative agreement has been made between you and the other therapists and family members. Many times this is not filled in by the therapist as concisely and accurately and fully as it should be, but this is to be signed by the parent. Parents should know that they should read the notes before they put their signature on it. That is something that is very important. And one last thing. Yes, bilingualism, of course, does the child qualify for bilingual therapy? therapy or not. But one of our things is, does child respond to calling of their name?
Mhm.
Well, I had someone tell me that until they were several years old, they thought their name was Miho.
Mhm.
Another one thought their name was another cultural adoring name. And when I called by their proper name, didn't know that. And there may be a few words, not necessarily bilingual, but a few words that I may include in a core vocabulary that are not English. And I
Right.
must make the words and the expressions and activities functional. I
Mhm.
don't want a child to say penny, comb, and book if they don't have a comb and they don't have a penny and they're
Right.
not reading a book yet. Let me know what you need your child to do, what goes on in your home. You may not have a microwave, you might have a toaster oven. So if I say microwave, I'm wasting everybody's time. Thank you
Right.
for a beautiful presentation, and thank you for your involvement. And to just mirror what someone else has said, very few parents, unfortunately, that I've worked with have the caring and concern as you do. I congratulate you and thank you.
That means a lot. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everything that you shared today. Marianne, I see Marianne has her hand up.
Hi. You made a beautiful presentation. Beautiful.
Thank you.
I just wanted to I've been doing teletherapy since the pandemic started, and I think it's important as therapists that we realize different families have many, many different struggles that they face every day.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
giving homework, it's great, but I think just giving homework within their daily life, it could be simple as, oh, let's go to the car. Okay.
Mhm.
You need to get your coat.
Mhm.
And that is therapeutic in its own sense.
Yeah. I mean,
it's not adding burden.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that. So homework, I mean, I know we think homework, I'm not talking about like pages of worksheets or whatever, something that's going to add stress to the family, but something that can definitely already be integrated into the day. It could be something as simple as narrate what you're doing to the child or for the child, like, okay, I'm making dinner now. I'm putting the eggs in the frying pan. That could be something that could be considered quote unquote homework.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I agree with you on that.
Yes.
I agree with you on that. Thank you so much for sharing. So does anyone else have any questions? So, one thing I just wanted to throw out there, I'm not here in a work capacity, but someone did ask me, if you live in New York City and you're working with any children who may need services or, are struggling with just understanding early intervention or CPSC, you can refer them to Include NYC. So I'll just drop I'd send it as a private message to someone, but you can just refer them, and this is for individuals in New York City. I'll put the helpline number in the chat. So if you have any families for those in New York City that need any help in regards to special education, early intervention, trying to navigate services, you can call the Include NYC helpline. You can go to includenyc.org and learn more about the organization. So that's the organization that I work for. So someone asks, okay, if we've had opportunity to present to any other groups, from a personal capacity, no. So I do this a lot, my 9 to 5, quote unquote, but personally, no. We have a question from Marianne. Marianne, you have your hand up?
I'm sorry, I forgot to take my hand down.
Oh, okay. I think I can lower it. Okay, yes, I just lowered it. Okay. So someone is asking about behavior. I've worked with children 4 to 9 and now working with individuals over 21. Often the parents are not involved. Do you have thoughts, suggestions? Behaviors and abilities tend to be ingrained in those who are over 21. So when it comes to behavior, I know for New York State, like if it's a behavior that's considered a crisis behavior, I know if the person has OPWDD services, the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities, there are behavior intervention services that the individual can get. So if the individual is eligible for OPWDD and they have a care manager, the care manager can be able to connect them with supports. You know, if they're in a residential facility, there should be a way to be able to tap into those supports through that facility. But if I know, so there are parent centers or centers here in New York City and actually throughout New York State where you may be able to call to be able to get more help. So if you go to parentcenterhub.org, you'll be able to find the centers that serve our state. And it goes by county, so the area that you're in, and you'll be able to connect with resources that way to be able to support them. Yeah, someone is saying that you can connect. OPWDD is the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. Sorry. Yeah, I know we get so caught up in acronyms, right? So I'm sorry about that. Are there regional groups for autism throughout the state?
You mean support groups? Or?
Yeah, so when you say regional groups, can you speak a little bit more on that, Nancy?
Rock it all. Look at my eyes. That tree.
Like right there, like right that side.
Yeah, so someone was asking about regional autism groups.
Was it Nancy?
Yeah, I think it was someone named Nancy. It depends on the group, the type of group that you're looking for. I know that's the National Autism Association. They have a chapter in New York. So that's another way to connect with families. Okay, parent support groups. Okay. Yeah, there are parent support groups. I mean, we have a parent support group here in the Bronx. There are a couple of parent support groups in New York City. But as far as statewide, I'm not aware of any that are statewide, except for the National Autism Association. They have a New York chapter and they also do support groups for families. So if you're looking for something, if you're looking for something New York City specific, you can still call that helpline number that I put in the chat, and a list can be sent to you. So I hope that helps.
So I think we have
like 3 minutes left.
left.
So does anyone else have any questions or any comments? Okay, the Anderson Center for Autism is one. So I know, yeah, I know that's a place where people can go and get services, and they have a school and all of that. So I am aware of Anderson.
I have a comment, but I'm not able to get my hand raiser to go up.
Okay,
I know, yes, people have addressed support groups, but I do not want families to leave out the possibility of actual counseling as opposed to support groups. And the number, I cannot cite the quote yet, but the number of separations and divorces amongst families that have a child on the spectrum is tremendous. And it gets down to blame and guilt. Well, it was your family, you did this and you did that, you should have done that. And right now, okay, so maybe they're isolating a gene or two, but we really don't know what's causing it and who's causing it. Is there a predisposition? If you have one child, there might be another. Okay, fine, those are all numbers. But sometimes people have to talk out what this is all about and how it's affecting the family. I've found in my years of experience, it either brings the couple as close together as possible or splits them apart, leading to total separation, divorce.
Oh, Lord. Thank you so much, Alan. Yeah, so yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. I think when a child is diagnosed with a developmental disability like autism, I mean, it impacts the entire family. You know, and like you said, it's either you come together or you may go apart. It can, there can be times where it can be a strain on relationships and friendships. And for me, I felt like my village grew after my son was diagnosed because I was able to connect with other families and other parents who were going through the same. And that's where the value of the support group comes in, but it doesn't replace the need for additional support, as you mentioned, Alan. So yes, I can be in a support group, but if there are other issues and things that I'm dealing with, I need to get that mental health support so that I'm able to be the best that I can be for my family. So we thank you all.
Yeah, less than a minute. So yes, thank you everyone for joining. It really means a lot for us to present to you today, and also sharing some of the feedback that you have provided. I hope we can make the world better with the information that we shared today.
Yeah, yeah. And we really appreciate everything that you all shared, because like I mentioned before, you can probably teach us some things, right? Because as even Alan mentioned, you've been doing this for 50 years. So I'm sure there's a lot that we can learn from each other. So we appreciate all of you. And we appreciate those that have been leaving resources in the chat as well. So if you got the handout, we had some links on there with some additional resources that you can share with families. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.